Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Time to Laugh. Happy Monday. I hope you guys had a great weekend. I know I had a great weekend. It was my birthday this weekend, so I got to celebrate with all my favorite people, and it was so fun. And yeah, I wanted to give you guys a little update. If you follow me on Instagram, you will know that I took on a couple challenges for June, and I started on June 1st, obviously. So it's been a week already. And the two challenges that I set for myself were one, sleeping on a Japanese floor mattress. I bought one on Amazon, budget friendly. And I had just been seeing so many videos about it on Instagram, and I've literally been telling all my friends about it. But I've been seeing so many videos about it on Instagram, and so many of them were saying that it helped their back pain. And so I just decided, why not? I'm going to try it. And so I bought one on Amazon, and I've been sleeping on it for a week. And honestly, it's been great. I feel like it is actually helping my back pain. And obviously, I'm still kind of in the adjustment phase, but after a week, I already really like it. So I'm actually about to sell my bed and rearrange my room and do all the things. So far that's been going really good. I've been keeping a log just to note any significant changes or significant soreness or pain or just how I'm sleeping in general, just to see. And I have an Apple Watch, so that's helping me track, my sleep score and how much sleep I'm getting and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, so that's been going really well. I've been really enjoying that. And then the other challenge that I set for myself is to not be on any screens while I eat. It's something that I was talking to a friend about, and she was telling me that the mindlessness of being on a screen while you're eating is not good for you. And so I've been doing that for a week, and there's definitely been a couple times where it's been a challenge, and I've had to actually force myself to not be on screens and even just like not even have my phone close to me, because it's really easy for me to just grab my phone and get distracted. But yeah, so not watching YouTube videos, not being on my phone, not reading on my Kindle, not even reading in general, just because it makes you distracted and you can't listen to your body's like hunger cues as well and all that kind of stuff. So it's that one's been a challenge, but I have a lot of the time found it actually pretty relaxing. And it kind of like gives me permission to zone out for a second. Like I obviously think about stuff, but a lot of times I just kind of sit there and like stare off into the distance and eat my food, and it's kind of great. And it is definitely true that I have been able to understand my body's hunger cues a lot better. And so I've been just stopping when I'm full. And even there's been a couple times where like I've heated up a meal, heated up leftovers or whatever, and started to eat it, and I get like halfway through it, I'm like, I'm kind of done with this, and then I'll go eat something else. So that's been kind of good. But yeah, so just wanted to give you guys an update on that. Obviously, I don't know if everybody here follows me on Instagram, but that's where I posted it. I think I mentioned it on my stream last week, but yeah, so that's a little update for you guys. And what was the other thing? I wrote the couple things down that I wanted to. Oh yes, okay. The other thing is I just finished another book. It's called Tempests and Tea Leaves, and it was so good. I absolutely loved it. I already am starting to work on my book review for it, which I still have not filmed any of the book reviews that I want to film, but I will get to it, I promise. I am just working on filling out the outline that I created so that I can start like filming things and then posting those so that I can give you guys more content on the book review front, because obviously I'm reading on Hi, Stanley is around. Welcome in. what was I saying? Oh, I'm reading on my streams, and I'm trying to do ones that I either have permission to read or that are public domain so that I can read out loud, because I just think it's really fun. It's a little bit more engaging than me just reading in my head. But then because those are dedicated solely to my stream, hi Ann Clark, welcome in. But I'm also reading books outside, just like in my free time. And so I'm a Tempest and Tea Leaves was one that my sister recommended to me, that she really liked. And so I read that. I just finished it last night. Stayed up maybe a little bit too late to finish it because it was so good. But yeah, I finished that one. So I'm working on the book review, and I will start to get some book review videos filmed and hopefully posted here soon. So if you want to follow me on Instagram, that's where I'll be posting those. Time to laugh.34 is my Instagram. That's kind of my home base for all the different things. So if you want to follow me on there, you can see all the things that I'm doing and find all my links for everything. I'm doing really good, Ann Clark. How are you doing? Did you have a good weekend? So with that, I am going to jump into my stream for today. Obviously, my last stream, I finished reading The Chalet Next Door by Cassandra Joel, and that one I read out loud. I got permission from the author to read it out loud, and it was super cute. I really enjoyed it. So again, we'll be filming some videos of that one. But if you want to go back and watch any of those videos of me reading that book, I read it out loud. So it's kind of like an audiobook, but a little bit more interactive because I'm talking to you and reacting and all the different things. So, amazing. Yes, Stanley, I am reading a whole book on stream. Obviously, I don't finish it in one sitting. My last... let's see. I've read 2 so far out loud. So I'm very new to the whole Twitch streaming thing, and I've been I surprised myself with how much I loved it. And I started in January. The first couple months that I did it, I was just reading the books like in my head and just reacting like I normally do. And was kind of why I started the stream in the first place, because I'm a very animated person, and so I react just out loud. I laugh, I cry, all the different things. And so I started it, and the first ones was just me reading in my head and then reacting out loud. But then I got the idea from a friend to see if I could get permission from authors to read their books out loud. And so the first one that I read was actually the author goes to my church. And so she gave me permission to read her book, and it was so good. And all of those videos they should be on my Twitch still. But I also posted them on my YouTube channel, which is same thing, Time to Laugh 34. So if you could go subscribe there. All those full videos of me reading the books out loud are up there. My other streams I have like edited down to highlights and put on my YouTube channel as well. So if you guys want to get caught up on any of that stuff or just go check it out, you're more than welcome to go subscribe to my YouTube channel. But yeah, so that one I think took me 5 streams to, fully finish. And then the Chalet Next Door, the one that I just finished, took me 3, I think. So it just kind of depends on the length of the book. Obviously unless my followers request me to do a longer, like epic saga or something that's really long, I'll probably stick to shorter books, for now, just cause it makes it easier. I can change it up a little bit more. But yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at. Yeah, that is the one thing that I run into a little bit, especially because it's after Sundays and I'm on my worship team at church. And so sometimes my voice will be a little bit tired on Monday. And so I always have my water bottle right next to me because I take sips of water in between chapters to keep my mouth hydrated, I guess is the right word. I do write a little bit. I hesitate to say that I write just because I haven't necessarily written anything of note. Like I've never written a book. I really love to write poetry. That's something that I actually haven't done it in a while. But I used to love doing it when I was in school. and I've written it a little bit. It's one of those things that poetry has really helped me in seasons where I'm struggling with things or just feeling emotions really deeply. It's helped me to kind of, it's almost like a way of journaling for me. So that's something that I definitely love to do. But I also have started to write more recently because I don't know if you guys have been asked the question, but I love asking people this question. If you had no fear of failure, or you knew you couldn't fail and money was not an issue, resources was not an issue, what would you do? And one of my answers is write a book, because I love to read and I think it would be such a fun process to write a book. And so I'm trying, and I just love to write in general, so I'm trying to get back into it a little bit more. And so I actually have a Substack. And if you haven't heard of it, it's basically like a kind of like a blog. You can use it for a bunch of different things. Like I follow some people on Substack that like post a lot of recipes on there or whatever, but you can post like shorter posts that are kind of like a social media, like little note post. You can post like audio podcast things. You can post articles. And so the articles is what I'm mainly using it for. So it's kind of like a blog. And you can subscribe to people's Substack and you can get their new posts sent right to your email. But the link to that is on my Instagram page, and I usually, when I post a Substack article, I'll usually post on my Instagram as well to give kind of an idea of what the article is about, and then I'll post a story with the link to the Substack article. So I write a little bit, I read a little bit. I've had a couple people that have been watching my stream that were encouraging me to even just help fellow writers. Like I've actually, I had a follower send me one of their short stories, and I read it on stream and just gave some feedback for them. And so, yeah, it's been really fun, honestly, to just like interact with you guys and get recommendations and just have people kind of follow along on the journey. I'm still new to all of this, so I'm still kind of figuring it out and what my cadence is and figuring out how to do it, because I work full time as well. So figuring out how to make time for it, but also keep it sustainable and not make it overwhelming. But ultimately, my main goal with this is just to foster people's love for reading. And I've even had conversations in the last couple weeks with some of my friends at church that have just reminded me, so many people lose their love of reading in school because they're constantly having to read for school and they just don't have time to read for fun. And I want to help people find their love of reading again. And so I'm always down to give people book recommendations. I feel like I'm pretty good at giving book recommendations because I've read a decent amount in different genres. And so I'm able to kind of, from whatever genre they want, give them a pretty good recommendation. So I've been trying to do that with some of my friends to get them back into reading because I'm just so passionate about it. I love it so much. I think it's so good for you. It's so much fun. It brings people together. I could just talk about books for hours. I think it's incredible. So, but anyways, I'll get off my soapbox, but that's kind of all the things about me. But Stanley, that's a big undertaking. I love that. Do you know what your manga series is going to be like based on? Like what genre or, yeah, I would love to hear more. That's awesome. I've read a couple mangas. I haven't finished the whole series, but I read quite a few volumes of Haiku. It's a volleyball manga. And then I watched a couple of the seasons of the anime, and it was super fun. Loved it. I loved that it was just like lighthearted, not, low stakes, all the different things. And it was a good one for me to read too, because I tried reading volume 1 of Naruto at one point, but it's just hard to, for me, it was hard to like fully understand all the like the hand signs and everything for their magic. And so I was like, I feel like this is one that I just need to watch. But anyways, yeah, I would love to hear more about that. That's super exciting. Oh, that's cool. Oh my gosh. Have you written anything as well? Or do you just do like art? Do you do fan art? Do you do just like Oh, wow. This is so exciting. I love that you guys are here. Oh my gosh. Ooh, that sounds fun. I love that. Do you know how many, do you already kind of have like the overarching story for it, Stanley? Or are you gonna kind of write as you go and figure out where it goes from there? Um, I love that. That's so exciting. Okay, I'm gonna dive into it because I don't want to take too long, and don't want the stream to be like 3 hours, unless it just happens that way. But ooh, love that. That's so cool. So I today am going to start reading Emma by Jane Austen. I It's a little bit off the beaten path. It might not be everybody's cup of tea, but I one am hoping that me reading it out loud and reacting the way I do and all that kind of stuff will help people enjoy it more than they would maybe if they were just trying to read on their own. But also, I was very much inspired. Me and a group of my girlfriends started a little group and we named it Regency Roundtable because we are basically just starting a movie club where we get together and we watch Regency era movies. And it's funny how many people, when we've told them about this, don't know what Regency is or like the Regency era. And which is so sad to me. I guess like the word itself, like once I describe it, they kind of understand what it is, but I just love that era, like Bridgerton and Pride and Prejudice, and I mean Bridgerton's a little bit more modernized, but Pride and Prejudice, Jane Eyre, Emma, Sense and Sensibility. Like Pride and Prejudice is one of my favorite movies of all time, the 2005 with Keira Knightley. I have watched the 1996 BBC short series and also loved that, but the nostalgia of the 2005 Keira Knightley version is just, it hits close to home. So that's my favorite version of it, but I have so much respect and did really enjoy the 1996 version. So but anyways, so we started this group. We called it the Regency Roundtable. We're watching Regency era movies, and we had our first one this last weekend, and it was so much fun. It was great to just hang out with my girlfriends, but also just watch. We ended up watching a movie called Belle. If you haven't seen it, it is incredible. And I won't go into all the details, but you can look it up. It's based on a true story, and it's just a beautiful movie. The acting is incredible, the story is incredible, the side characters are incredible, the love declaration is incredible. Oh, I love it so much. That's okay. Regency era is basically like old English, in the time of like the regents, like the queen regent, the king regent, all that kind of stuff. And so it's, corsets and propriety and societal pressures of, women having to find a good match and to provide for their families and all this kind of thing. And so I love it because it has that tension of responsibility and what you're required to do by society, but also trying to find love within that. And so it does a really good job of making commentary on societal pressures, societal stereotypes, societal norms, while not feeling, dare I say, woke. And like they're pushing an agenda, like the way that they do it in Regency era media, I just feel like is so beautiful. And one of the things that me and my girlfriends were talking about after we watched the movie on last weekend was that there is a sense of, I think one of the reasons why I love Regency era media in general, books or movies, is because there is a sense of longing in the love story and the romance that I just think is missing so much nowadays, especially with the rise of smut and just so many more explicit scenes and all that kind of stuff. It loses it loses the longing, it loses the tension in the romance. The fact that they couldn't, I mean, women could barely even show their ankles. They had to wear gloves all the time. You know, you're not touching each other. You have to court each other. You always have an escort. It's like there just is this sense of tension that builds into people that are getting to know each other but can't do anything about it. And I just think that's so beautiful, and I think it makes it so much more explosive and passionate when they're actually able to declare their love for each other. And I just think it's so much more romantic, to be perfectly honest. And so yeah, I've like kind of rediscovered my love of Regency era stuff lately. And so I was just inspired to start reading, because I love Pride and Prejudice and I love that era, but I actually haven't read, I don't think I've read any Jane Austen books. Wait, this is sad that I don't know, but is Pride and Prejudice Jane Austen? Please hold for 1 second. Pride and Prejudice. Yes, okay. That's what I thought. I thought it was Jane Austen, but I wasn't sure. Okay, so Pride and Prejudice is the only Jane Austen book that I have read. And I read it last year, I think, and it was so good. Obviously a little bit different than the movie, because it always is, but I really enjoyed it. And so I've been inspired because I have had a couple of these books just sitting on my shelf. And so I was just like, you know what? We're going to do it. So a couple of my friends told me I need to read Sense and Sensibility, so I'll probably read that one as well. But this one I already had a copy of, so I figured, why not start with this one? And it's obviously outside the scope of copyright. It's in the public domain, so I'm allowed to read it out loud without getting copyright strike, which is great. And then I'm going to play some copyright-free music in the back just to, you know, set the tone, keep the vibes high. So yeah, I'm going to read the back of this so you guys kind of know. If you don't know, if you haven't heard of Emma, then you know what it's about. It says, some of Jane Austen's most beloved characters are those who are most blind to their own feelings and the feelings of those around them. Marian Dashwood in Sense and Sensibility is an example of the type, but no Austen creation is so completely and yet so endearingly clueless as Emma Woodhouse. Convinced of her own superior matchmaking skills, she wrongly takes credit for pairing off her former governess and a neighboring gentleman. Yet determined to remain unattached herself, Emma sets out to direct the fates of parentless Harriet Smith, the vicar, Mr. Elton, and newcomer Frank Churchill, among others. Misunderstanding is piled on mishap until Mr. Knightley, stern, wise, and kind, forces Emma to see her errors and the direction of her own future. Austen feared that no one but herself would like Emma. She needn't have worried. Since its publication in 1816, Emma has been claimed as Austen's best novel by readers and critics everywhere. The 1995 movie Clueless was based on Emma. Cute! This is so funny, actually, because this version of the book is a Borders classic. I don't know if y'all have heard of Borders or had it anywhere you lived, but Borders was like the bookstore where I grew up in Montana. And now Barnes & Nobles is like the bookstore, but Borders was it for me. So that's so funny. This book is probably so old. But anyways, let us dive into it. Welcome to all of the followers or the viewers that are watching right now. I'm about to dive into Emma, and if y'all have any comments or questions or anything, feel free to drop into the chat and let me know. I will try to keep an eye on it as I read, but I'm going to dive into reading Emma by Jane Austen. Emma Woodhouse, handsome, clever, and rich, with a comfortable home and happy disposition, seemed to unite some of the best blessings of existence, and had lived nearly 21 years in the world with very little to distress or vex her. She was the youngest of two daughters of a most affectionate, indulgent father, and had, in consequence of her sister's marriage, been mistress of his house from a very early period. Her mother had died too long ago for her to have more than an indistinct remembrance of her caresses, and her place had been supplied by an excellent woman as governess, who had fallen little short of a mother in affection. 16 years had Miss Taylor been in Mr. Woodhouse's family, less as a governess than a friend, very fond of both daughters, but particularly of Emma. Between them, it was more the intimacy of sisters. Even before Miss Taylor had ceased to hold the nominal office of governess, the mildness of her temper had hardly allowed her to impose any restraint, and the shadow of authority being now long passed away, they had been living together as friend and friend, very mutually attached, and Emma doing just what she liked, highly esteeming Miss Taylor's judgment, but directed chiefly by her own. The real evils, indeed, of Emma's situation were the power of having rather too much her own way, and a disposition to think a little too well of herself. These were the disadvantages which threatened alloy to her many enjoyments. The danger, however, was at present so unperceived that they did not by any means rank as misfortunes with her. Sorrow came, a gentle sorrow, but not at all in the shape of any disagreeable consciousness. Miss Taylor married. It was Miss Taylor's loss which first brought grief. It was on the wedding day of this beloved friend that Emma first sat in mournful thought of any continuance. The wedding over and the bride people gone, her father and herself were left to dine together, with no prospect of a third to cheer a long evening. Her father composed himself to sleep after dinner, as usual, and she had then only to sit and think of what she had lost. The event had every promise of happiness for her friend. Mr. Weston was a man of unexceptionable character, easy fortune, suitable age, and pleasant manners, and there was some satisfaction in considering with what self-denying, generous friendship she had always wished and promoted the match. But it was a black morning's work for her. The want of Miss Taylor would be felt every hour of every day. She recalled her past kindness, the affection of 16 years now, how she had taught and how she had played with her from 5 years old, how she had devoted all her powers to attach and amuse her in health, and how nursed her through the various illnesses of childhood. A large debt of gratitude was owing her, but the intercourse of the last 7 years, the equal footing and perfect unreserve which had soon followed Isabella's marriage, on their being left to each other, was yet a dearer, tenderer recollection. Excuse me. She had been a friend and companion such as few possessed, intelligent, well-informed, useful, gentle, knowing all the ways of the family, interested in all its concerns, and peculiarly interested in herself, in every pleasure, every scheme of hers, one to whom she could speak every thought as it arose, and who had such an affection for her as could never find fault. How was she to bear the change? It was true that her friend was going only half a mile from them, but Emma was aware that great must be the difference between a Mrs. Weston only half a mile from them and a Miss Taylor in the house. And with all her advantages, natural and domestic, she was now in great danger of suffering from intellectual solitude. She dearly loved her father, but he was no companion for her. He could not meet her in conversation, rational or playful. Honestly, that is a very fair, concern to have, I guess, where you don't have someone that can, match your energy, match your wit, all those different things. I think it's kind of rare to find people that you fully gel with and flow with in conversation, and it's a blessing to be able to find those people. I am blessed to have found those people that I feel very comfortable with and that can have flowing conversation very easily, but I can understand why Emma is grieving that loss of her friend. The evil of the actual disparity in their ages, and Mr. Woodhouse had not married early, was much increased by his constitution and habits, for having been a valetudinarian all his life, which I don't know what that word means. Let's look it up really quick, shall we, folks? Define valetudinarian. A valetudinarian is a person who is chronically weak, sickly, or in poor health. Okay, so she has a very sick father. Okay. The evil of the actual disparity in their ages, she's talking about her father now, was much increased by his constitution and habits, for having been a valetudinarian all his life without activity of mind or body, he was a much older man in ways than years. And though everywhere beloved for the friendliness of his heart and his amiable temper, his talents could not have recommended him at any time. Her sister, though comparatively but little removed by matrimony, being settled in London, only 16 miles off, was much beyond her daily reach, and many a long October and November evening must be struggled through at Hartfield, before Christmas brought the next visit from Isabella and her husband, and their little children to fill the house and give her pleasant society again. Highbury, the large and populous village, almost amounting to a town to which Hartfield, in spite of its separate lawn and shrubberies and name, did really belong, afforded her no equals. The Woodhouses were first in consequence there. All looked up to them. She had many acquaintance in the place, for her father was universally civil, but not one among them who could be accepted in lieu of Miss Taylor for even half a day. It was a melancholy change, and Emma could not but sigh over it, and wish for impossible things, till her father awoke, and made it necessary to be cheerful. His spirits required support. He was a nervous man, easily depressed, fond of everybody that he was used to, and hating to part with them, hating change of every kind. Matrimony, as the origin of change, was always disagreeable, and he was by no means yet reconciled to his own daughter's marrying, nor could ever speak of her but with compassion, though it had been entirely a match of affection, when he was now obliged to part with Miss Taylor too. And from his habits of gentle selfishness, and of being never able to suppose that other people could feel differently from himself, he was very much disposed to think Miss Taylor had done as sad a thing for herself as for them, and would have been a great deal happier if she had spent all the rest of her life at Hartfield. Emma smiled and chatted as cheerfully as she could to keep him from such thoughts, but when tea came it was impossible for him not to say exactly as he had said at dinner. Poor Miss Taylor! I wish she were here again. What a pity it is that Mr. Weston ever thought of her. I cannot agree with you, papa. You know I cannot. Mr. Weston is such a good-humoured, pleasant, excellent man, that he thoroughly deserves a good wife, and you would not have had Miss Taylor live with us for ever, and bear all my odd humours, when she might have a house of her own. A house of her own? But where is the advantages of a house of her own? This is 3 times as large, and you have never any odd humours, my dear. How often we shall be going to see them, and they coming to see us. We shall always be meeting. We must begin. We must go and pay wedding visit very soon. My dear, how am I to get so far? Randalls is such a distance. I could not walk half so far. No, papa, nobody thought of your walking. We must go in a carriage, to be sure. The carriage? But James will not like to put the horses to for such a little way, and where are the poor horses to be while we are paying our visit? They are to be put into Mr. Weston's stable, papa. You know we have settled all that already. We talked it all over with Mr. Weston last night. And as for James, you may be very sure he will always like going to Randalls, because of his daughter's being housemaid there. I only doubt whether he will ever take us anywhere else. That was your doing, papa. You got Hannah that good place. Nobody thought of Hannah till you mentioned her. James is so obliged to you. I am very glad I did think of her. It was very lucky, for I would not have had poor James think himself slighted upon my account, and I am sure she will make a very good servant. She is a civil, pretty-spoken girl. I have a great opinion of her. Whenever I see her, she always curtsies and asks me how I do in a very pretty manner, and when you have had her here to do needlework, I observe she always turns to lock the door the right way, and never bangs it. I am sure she will be an excellent servant, and it will be a great comfort to poor Miss Taylor to have somebody about her that she is used to seeing. Whenever James goes over to see his daughter, you know, she will be hearing of us. He will be able to tell her how we all are. Emma spared no exertions to maintain this happier flow of ideas, and hoped, by the help of backgammon, to get her father tolerably through the evening, and be attacked by no regrets but her own. The backgammon table was placed, but a visitor immediately afterwards walked in and made it unnecessary. Mr. Knightley, a sensible man about 7 or 8 and 30, was not only a very old and intimate friend of the family, but particularly connected with it, as the elder brother of Isabella's husband. He lived about a mile from Highbury, was a frequent visitor, and always welcome, and at this time more welcome than usual, as coming directly from their mutual connections in London. He had returned to a late dinner, after some days' absence, and now walked up to Hartfield to say that all were well in Brunswick Square. It was a happy circumstance, and animated Mr. Woodhouse for some time. Mr. Knightley had a cheerful manner, which always did him good, and his many inquiries after poor Isabella and her children were answered most satisfactorily. When this was over, Mr. Woodhouse gratefully observed, "It was very kind of you, Mr. Knightley, to come out at this late hour to call upon us. I am afraid you must have had a shocking walk." "Not at all, sir. It is a beautiful moonlight night, and so mild that I must draw back from your great fire." "But you must have found it very damp and dirty. I wish you may not catch cold." "Dirty, sir? Look at my shoes, not a speck on them." "Well, that is quite surprising, for we have had a vast deal of rain here. It rained dreadfully hard for half an hour while we were at breakfast. I wanted them to put off the wedding. By the by, I have not wished you joy. Being pretty well aware of what sort of joy you must both be feeling, I have been in no hurry with my congratulations, but I hope it all went off tolerably well. How did you all behave? Who cried most?" "Ah, poor Miss Taylor! 'Tis a sad business." "Poor Mr. and Miss Woodhouse, if you please, but I cannot possibly say poor Miss Taylor. I have a great regard for you and Emma, but when it comes to the question of dependence or independence, at any rate it must be better to have only one to please than two." "Especially when one of those two is such a fanciful, troublesome creature," said Emma playfully. "This is what you have in your head, I know, and what you would certainly say if my father were not by." I believe it is very true, my dear, indeed, said Mr. Woodhouse with a sigh. I'm afraid I am sometimes very fanciful and troublesome. See, that's funny because Mr. Woodhouse just seems to be a little bit unobservant and unaware of things around him, which I'm assuming Emma then kind of inherited from him, I would say. My dearest papa, you do not think I can mean you, or suppose Mr. Knightley to mean you. What a horrible idea. Oh, no, I meant only myself. Mr. Knightley loves to find fault with me, you know. In a joke. It is all a joke. We always say what we like to one another. Interesting. Sorry, I'm putting a sticky note on that. This is the first we're hearing of Mr. Knightley, so we must make sure we note the initial impressions and relationships. Mr. Knightley, in fact, was one of the few people who could see faults in Emma Woodhouse, and the only one who ever told her of them. And though this was not particularly agreeable to Emma herself, she knew it would be so much less so to her father, that she would not have him really suspect such a circumstance as her not being thought perfect by everybody. Emma knows I never flatter her, said Mr. Knightley, but I meant no reflection on anybody. Miss Taylor has been used to have two persons to please. She will now have but one. The chances are that she must be a gainer. Well, said Emma, willing it to pass, you want to hear about the wedding, and I shall be happy to tell you, for we all behaved charmingly. Everybody was punctual, everybody in their best looks, not a tear, and hardly a long face to be seen. Oh no, we all felt that we were going to be only half a mile apart, and were sure of meeting every day. Dear Emma bears everything so well, said her father, but Mr. Knightley, she is really very sorry to lose poor Miss Taylor, and I am sure she will miss her more than she thinks for. Emma turned away her head, divided between tears and smiles. It is impossible that Emma should not miss such a companion, said Mr. Knightley. We should not like her so well as we do, sir, if we could suppose it. But she knows how much the marriage is to Miss Taylor's advantage. She knows how very acceptable it must be, at Miss Taylor's time of life, to be settled in a home of her own, and how important to her to be secure of a comfortable provision, and therefore cannot allow herself to feel so much pain as pleasure. Every friend of Miss Taylor must be glad to have her so happily married. And you have forgotten one matter of joy to me, said Emma, and a very considerable one, that I made the match myself. I made the match, 4 years ago, and to have it take place and be proved in the right, when so many people said Mr. Weston would never marry again, may comfort me for anything. Mr. Knightley shook his head at her. Her father fondly replied, Ah, my dear, I wish you would not make matches and foretell things, for whatever you say always comes to pass. Pray do not make any more matches. I promise you to make none for myself, papa, but I must, indeed, for other people. It is the greatest amusement in the world, and after such success, Everybody said that Mr. Weston would never marry again. Oh, dear, no. Mr. Weston, who had been a widower so long, and who seemed so perfectly comfortable without a wife, so constantly occupied either in his business in town or among his friends here, always acceptable wherever he went, always cheerful. Mr. Weston need not spend a single evening in the year alone if he did not like it. Oh, no, Mr. Weston certainly would never marry again. Some people even talked of a promise to his wife on her deathbed, and others of the son and the uncle not letting him. All manner of solemn nonsense was talked on the subject, but I believed none of it. Ever since the day, about 4 years ago, that Miss Taylor and I met with him in Broadway Lane, when, because it began to drizzle, he darted away with so much gallantry and borrowed 2 umbrellas for us from Farmer Mitchell's, I made up my mind on the subject. I planned the match from that hour, and with such success as blessed me in this instance, dear papa, you cannot think that I shall leave off matchmaking. I love that. I do not understand what you mean by success, said Mr. Knightley. Success supposes endeavour. Your time has been properly and delicately spent if you have been endeavouring for the last 4 years to bring about this marriage, a worthy employment for a young lady's mind. But if, which I rather imagine you making the match, as you call it, means only your planning it, you say to yourself one idle day, I think it would be a very good thing for Miss Taylor if Mr. Weston were to marry her, and saying it again to yourself every now and then afterwards, why do you talk of success? Where is your merit? What are you proud of? You made a lucky guess, and that is all that can be said. Okay, challenger! I love that. And have you never known the pleasure and triumph of a lucky guess? I pity you. I thought you cleverer, for, depend upon it, a lucky guess is never merely luck. There is always some talent in it. And as to my poor word success, which you quarrel with, I do not know that I am so entirely without any claim to it. You have drawn 2 pretty pictures, but I think there may be a third, a something between the do-nothing and the do-all. If I had not promoted Mr. Weston's visits here, and given many little encouragements, and smoothed many little matters, it might not have come to anything after all. I think you must know Hartfield enough to comprehend that. A straightforward, open-hearted man like Weston, and a rational, unaffected woman like Miss Taylor, must be safely left to manage their own concerns. You are more likely to have done harm to yourself than good to them by interference. Emma never thinks of herself if she can do good to others, rejoined Mr. Woodhouse, understanding but in part. But, my dear, pray do not make any more matches. They are silly things, and break up one's family circle grievously. Only one more, papa, only for Mr. Elton. Poor Mr. Elton. You like Mr. Elton, papa? I must look about for a wife for him. There is nobody in Highbury who deserves him, and he has been here a whole year, and has fitted up his house so comfortably that it would be a shame to have him single any longer. And I thought when he was joining their hands today, he looked so very much as if he would like to have the same kind of office done for him. I think very well of Mr. Elton, and this is the only way I have of doing him a service. Mr. Elton is a very young man, to be sure. Mr. Elton is a very pretty young man, to be sure, and a very good young man, and I have a great regard for him. But if you want to show him any attention, my dear, ask him to come and dine with us some day. That will be a much better thing. I dare say Mr. Knightley will be so kind as to meet him. With a great pleasure, sir, at any time, said Mr. Knightley, laughing, and I agree with you entirely that it will be a much better thing. Invite him to dinner, Emma, and help him to the best of the fish and the chicken, but leave him to choose his own wife. Depend upon it, a man of 6 or 7 and 20 can take care of himself. Oh, that's funny. Sorry, I'm switching my phone into drop zone because I'm getting a bunch of texts. My Discord link doesn't work. That's not good. Is it the Discord link on Instagram? I'll have to look into it later. Thank you for letting me know. Okay, wait. I gotta take a drink of water. That was the end of chapter 1. Okay. Chapter 2. Mr. Weston was a native of Highbury, and born of a respectable family, which for the last 2 or 3 generations had been rising into gentility and property. He had received a good education, but, on succeeding early in life to a small independence, had become indisposed for any of the more homely pursuits in which his brothers were engaged, and had satisfied an active, cheerful mind and social temper by entering into the militia of his county, then embodied. Captain Weston was a general favourite, and when the chances of his military life had introduced him to Miss Churchill, of a great Yorkshire family, and Miss Churchill fell in love with him, nobody was surprised, except her brother and his wife, who had never seen him and who were full of pride and importance, which the connection would offend. Miss Churchill, however, being of age, and with the full command of her fortune, though her fortune bore no proportion to the family estate, was not to be dissuaded from the marriage, and it took place, to the infinite mortification of Mr. and Mrs. Churchill, who threw her off with due decorum. It was an unsuitable connection, and did not produce much happiness. Mrs. Weston ought to have found more in it, for she had a husband whose warm heart and sweet temper made him think everything due to her in return for the great goodness of being in love with him. But though she had one sort of spirit, she had not the best. She had resolution enough to pursue her own well in spite of her brother, but not enough to refrain from unreasonable regrets at that brother's unreasonable anger, nor from missing the luxuries of her former home. They lived beyond their income, but still it was nothing in comparison of Escombe. She did not cease to love her husband, but she wanted at once to be the wife of Captain Weston and Miss Churchill of Escombe. Captain Weston, who had been considerable, especially by the Churchills, as making such an amazing match. Captain Weston, who had been considered, especially by the Churchills, as making such an amazing match, was proved to have much the worse of the bargain. For when his wife died, and after 3 years' marriage, he was rather a poorer man than at first, and with a child to maintain. From the expense of the child, however, he was soon relieved. The boy had, with the additional softening claim of a lingering illness of his mother's, been the means of a sort of reconciliation, and Mr. and Mrs. Churchill, having no children of their own, nor any other young creature of equal kindred to care for, offered to take the whole charge of the little Frank soon after her decease. Some scruples and some reluctance the widower father may be supposed to have felt, but as they were overcome by other considerations, the child was given up to the care and wealth of the Churchills, and he had only his own comfort to seek, and his own situation to improve as he could. A complete change of life became desirable. He quitted the militia and engaged in trade, having brothers already established in a good way in London, which afforded him a favourable opening. It was a concern which brought just employment enough. He had still... Sorry, there's people outside my window. Good night. Bye, Stanley. He quitted the militia and engaged in trade, having brothers already established in a good way in London, which afforded him a favourable opening. It was a concern which brought just employment enough. He had still a small house in Highbury, where most of his leisure days were spent, and between useful occupation and the pleasures of society, the next 18 or 20 years of his life passed cheerfully away. He had, by that time, realized an easy competence, enough to secure the purchase of a little estate adjoining Highbury, which he had always longed for, enough to marry a woman as portionless even as Miss Taylor, and to live according to the wishes of his own friendly and social disposition. It was now some time since Miss Taylor had begun to influence his schemes, but as it was not the tyrannic influence of youth on youth, it had not shaken his determination of never settling till he could purchase Randalls, and the sale of Randalls was long looked forward to. But he had gone steadily on, with these objects in view, till they were accomplished. He had made his fortune, bought his house, and obtained his wife, and was beginning a new period of existence, with every probability of greater happiness than in any yet passed through. He had never been an unhappy man, his own temper had secured him from that, even in his first marriage, but his second must show him how delightful a well-judging and truly amiable woman could be, and must give him the pleasantness proof of its being a great deal better to choose than to be chosen, to excite gratitude than to feel it. Wow. Ooh. I like that. I accidentally grabbed 2 sticky notes. Sorry. Bink. Okay. There we go. He had only himself to please in this choice. His fortune was his own, for as to Frank, it was more than being tacitly brought up to his uncle's heir. It had become so avowed an adoption as to have him assume the name of Churchill on coming of age. It was most unlikely, therefore, that he should ever want his father's assistance. His father had no apprehension of it. The aunt was a capricious woman, and governed her husband entirely, but it was not in Mr. Weston's nature to imagine that any caprice could be strong enough to affect one so dear, and as he believed he deservedly... The aunt was a capricious woman, and governed her husband entirely, but it was not in Mr. Weston's nature to imagine that any caprice could be strong enough to affect one so dear, and as he believed so deservedly dear. He saw his son every year in London, and was proud of him, and his fond report of him as a very fine young man had made Highbury feel a sort of pride in him too. He was looked on as sufficiently belonged to the place to make his merits and prospects a kind of common concern. Mr. Frank Churchill was one of the boasts of Highbury, and a lively curiosity to see him prevailed, though the compliment was so little returned that he had never been there in his life. His coming to visit his father had been often talked of, but never achieved. Now, upon his father's marriage, it was very generally proposed, as a most proper attention, that the visit should take place. There was not a dissentient voice on the subject, either when Mrs. Perry drank tea with Mr. and Miss Bates, or when Mrs. and Miss Bates returned the visit. Now was the time for Mr. Frank Churchill to come among them, and the hope strengthened when it was understood that he had written to his new mother on the occasion. For a few days, every morning visit in Highbury included some mention of the handsome letter Mrs. Weston had received. I suppose you have heard of the handsome letter Mr. Frank Churchill has written to Mrs. Weston? I understand it was a very handsome letter indeed. Mr. Woodhouse told me of it. Mr. Woodhouse saw the letter, and he says he never saw such a handsome letter in his life. That's so funny. It was indeed a highly prized letter. Mrs. Weston had, of course, formed a very favourable idea of the young man, and such a pleasing attention was an irresistible proof of his great good sense, and a most welcome addition to every source and every expression of congratulation which her marriage had already secured. She felt herself a most fortunate woman, and she had lived long enough to know how fortunate she might well be thought, where the only regret was for a partial separation from friends whose friendship for her had never cooled, and who could ill bear to part with her. She knew that at times she must be missed, and could not think without pain of Emma's losing a single pleasure, or suffering an hour's ennui. Ennui? From the want of her... Is that how you say that? I'm going to look it up. Isn't that one of the, Oopsies. Define ennui. Ennui is a noun that refers to a feeling of listlessness, dissatisfaction, and weariness caused by a lack of excitement, occupation, or meaning. I'm going to play the... Oh, I got to turn my...
Ennui.
Ennui. Ennui. Also, really like the word caprice. Not super sure what that means, so I'm going to look it up also. But I like to put sticky notes on the words. But also that word, good morning, Slow Gamer! Welcome in! But also that word ennui, I think that's how they said it?
Ennui.
Ennui. Yeah, that is very fitting for what we know so far of Emma. Where was that? Oh, yeah. She knew that at times she must be missed, and could not think without pain of Emma's losing a single pleasure or suffering an hour's ennui from the want of her companionableness. But dear Emma was of no feeble character. She was more equal to her situation than most girls would have been, and had sense and energy and spirits that might be hoped would bear her well and happily through its little difficulties and privations. And then there was such comfort in the very easy distance of Randalls from Hartfield, so convenient for even solitary female walking, and in Mr. Weston's disposition and circumstances, which would make the approaching season no hindrance to their spending half the evenings in the week together. Her situation was altogether the subject of hours of gratitude to Mrs. Weston, and of moments only of regret, and her satisfaction, her more than satisfaction, her cheerful enjoyment was so just and so apparent, that Emma, well as she knew her father, was sometimes taken by surprise at his being still able to pity poor Miss Taylor, when they left her at Randalls in the centre of every domestic comfort, or saw her go away in the evening attended by her pleasant husband to a carriage of her own. But never did she go without Mr. Woodhouse's giving a gentle sigh and saying, "Ah, poor Miss Taylor, she would be very glad to stay." There was no recovering Miss Taylor, nor much likelihood of ceasing to pity her, but a few weeks brought some alleviation to Mr. Woodhouse. The compliments of his neighbours were over. He was no longer teased by being wished joy of so sorrowful an event, and the wedding cake, which had been a great distress to him, was all eat up. His own stomach could bear nothing rich, and he could never believe other people to be different from himself. What was unwholesome to him he regarded as unfit for anybody, and he had therefore earnestly tried to dissuade them from having any wedding cake at all, and when that proved vain, as earnestly tried to prevent anybody's eating it. He had been at the pains of consulting Mr. Perry, the apothecary, on the subject. Mr. Perry was an intelligent, gentlemanlike man, whose frequent visits were one of the comforts of Mr. Woodhouse's life, and upon being applied to, he could not but acknowledge, though it seemed rather against the bias of inclination, that wedding cake might certainly disagree with many, perhaps with most people, unless taken moderately. With such an opinion in confirmation of his own, Mr. Woodhouse hoped to influence every visitor of the newly married pair, but still the cake was eaten, and there was no rest for his benevolent nerves till it was all gone. There was a strange rumour in Highbury of all the little Perrys being seen with a slice of Mrs. Weston's wedding cake in their hands, but Mr. Woodhouse would never believe it. Oh, Mr. Woodhouse. That's really funny. What a character. I'm excited to read this book and then watch the movie, because this is such a... obviously, if you guys couldn't tell already, it's such a different writing style to modern books these days, and it definitely takes... I have to read a little bit slower, and it definitely takes me a second with some of these sentences to fully understand what's going on. But basically, so far, that was the end of chapter 2. Basically, so far, we've met Emma, her father, Mr. Woodhouse, her governess, who was her governess for a while and then kind of just became friend, Miss Taylor, has just married Mr. Weston, who is a widower, and they are very happy. Emma is grieving currently the loss of one of her greatest friends, but knows that she's able to see her quite often. And Mr. Woodhouse is fully grieved and pitying Miss Taylor, although she is currently in a very happy situation. And then we know Mr. Knightley is a friend of the family, and he comes by the Woodhouses quite often. And he is one of the only people that sees fault in Emma and will actually tell her those faults, because everybody else just kind of, I would say, worships the ground she walks on a little bit. And she has convinced herself that she was the reason that Mr. Weston married Miss Taylor. She thinks she was the matchmaker of that marriage. And so she is going to get in her head a little bit about that and try to make more matches, which is going to get interesting. Okay. Chapter 3. Mr. Woodhouse was fond of society in his own way. He liked very much to have his friends come and see him, and from various united causes, from his long residence at Hartfield, and his good nature, from his fortune, his house, and his daughter, he could command the visits of his own little circle in a great measure as he liked. He had not much intercourse with any families beyond that circle. His horror of late hours and large dinner parties made him unfit for any acquaintance but such as would visit him on his own terms. Fortunately for him, Highbury, including Randalls in the same parish, and Donwell Abbey in the parish adjoining, the seat of Mr. Knightley, comprehended many such. Not unfrequently, through Emma's persuasion, he had some of the chosen and the best to dine with him, but evening parties were what he preferred, and unless he fancied himself at any time unequal to company, there was scarcely an evening in the week in which Emma could not make up a card table for him. Real, long-standing regard brought the Westons and Mr. Knightley, and by Mr. Elton, a young man living alone without liking it, the privilege of exchanging any vacant evening of his own blank solitude for the elegancies and society of Mr. Woodhouse's drawing-room, and the smiles of his lovely daughter, was in no danger of being thrown away. After these came a second set, among the most come at able of whom were Mrs. and Miss Bates and Mrs. Goddard, 3 ladies almost always at the service of an invitation from Hartfield, and who were fetched and carried home so often that Mr. Woodhouse thought it no hardship for either James or the horses. Had it taken place only once a year, it would have been a grievance. That's so funny. It's like he thinks because it happens often that James is so used to it that it doesn't mean anything, but if it was only once a year, it would be like an inconvenience, basically. Mrs. Bates, the widow of a former vicar of Highbury, was a very old lady, almost past everything but tea and quadrille. She lived with her single daughter in a very small way, and as was considered with all the regard and respect which a harmless old lady under such untoward circumstances can excite. Her daughter enjoyed a most uncommon degree of popularity for a woman neither young, handsome, rich, nor married. Miss Bates stood in the very worst predicament in the world for having much of the public favor, and she had no intellectual superiority to make atonement to herself, or frighten those who might hate her into outward respect. She had never boasted either beauty or cleverness. Her youth had passed without distinction, and her middle of life was devoted to the care of a failing mother, and the endeavor to make a small income go as far as possible. And yet she was a happy woman, and a woman whom no one named without goodwill. It was her own universal goodwill and contented temper which worked such wonders. She loved everybody, was interested in everybody's happiness, quick-sighted to everybody's merits, thought herself a most fortunate creature, and surrounded with blessings in such an excellent mother, and so many good neighbors and friends, and a home that wanted for nothing. The simplicity and cheerfulness of her nature, her contented and grateful spirit, were a recommendation to everybody, and a mine of felicity to herself. She was a great talker upon little matters, which exactly suited Mr. Woodhouse, full of trivial communications and harmless gossip. I think it's so funny. Well, okay. It's okay. I almost said it again. I think it's funny. I had this conversation with a friend recently where he was saying that he says that phrase too often. He thinks it's kind of funny or it's really funny, when really most of the time you're using that phrase, it's not that funny. But what I was originally saying is what I like about this era, and particularly this writing style so far, is that there's no qualms about saying like it is. I feel like in a lot of romances nowadays, people are so focused on the butterflies and the creating a beautiful picture and all that kind of stuff. And I love that. It's great. But I almost feel like sometimes if you don't have the opposite end of the spectrum, where you have people that are, whether it's terrible, evil, whatever, or just people that are kind of plain and normal, like that's a reality in our lives. Like everybody is special, everybody's loved by God, everybody has gifts and talents, all that kind of stuff. But when you're like when you put yourself in the like the main character's spot, basically, there are going to be people that you come across, that you encounter in your life, that feel just kind of ordinary. And I love that, like, this whole what's the word? This whole words are failing me. This whole description, thank you. The word finally came to me. This whole description of Miss Bates is just, it's like, it's so honest. It's like, she's not very smart. She doesn't have wealth at all. She's not married. She isn't super good looking, but she's a very nice person and she cares about people and she's very easy to be around. So, so it's just like, I don't know. I just really like that description because I feel like that's real versus trying to make everybody look good or have everything be so heightened, I guess. Mrs. Goddard was the mistress of a school, not of a seminary or an establishment or anything which professed in long sentences of refined nonsense to combine liberal acquirements with elegant morality upon new principles and new systems, and where young ladies for enormous pay might be screwed out of health and into vanity, but a real, honest, old-fashioned boarding school, where a reasonable quantity of accomplishments were sold at a reasonable price, and where girls might be sent to be out of the way and scramble themselves into a little education without any danger of coming back prodigies. Mrs. Goddard's school was in high repute, and very deservedly, for Highbury was reckoned a particularly healthy spot. She had an ample house and garden, gave the children plenty of wholesome food, let them run about a great deal in the summer, and in winter dressed their chilblains with her own hands. It was no wonder that a train of 20 young couple now walked after her to church. She was a plain, motherly kind of woman who had worked hard in her youth, and now thought herself entitled to the occasional holiday of a tea visit, and having formerly owned much to Mr. Woodhouse's kindness, felt his particular claim to her to leave her neat parlour, hung round with fancy work whenever she could, and win or lose a few sixpences by his fireside. These were the ladies whom Emma found herself very frequently able to collect, and happy was she, for her father's sake, in the power, though as far as she was herself concerned it was no remedy for the absence of Mrs. Weston. She was delighted to see her father look comfortable, and very much pleased with herself for contriving things so well, but the quiet prosings of 3 such women made her feel that every evening so spent was indeed one of the long evenings she had fearfully anticipated. As she sat one morning looking forward to exactly such a close of the present day, a note was brought from Mrs. Goddard requesting, in most respectful terms, to be allowed to bring Miss Smith with her, a most welcome request, for Miss Smith was a girl of 17, whom Emma knew very well by sight, and had long felt an interest in, on account of her beauty. A very gracious invitation was returned, and the evening no longer dreaded by the fair mistress of the mansion. Harriet Smith was the natural daughter of somebody. Somebody had placed her, several years back, at Mrs. Goddard's school, and somebody had lately raised her from the condition of scholar to that of parlour boarder. This was all that was generally known of her history. She had no visible friends, but what had been acquired at Highbury, and was now just returned from a long visit in the countries to some young ladies who had been at school there with her. She was a very pretty girl, and her beauty happened to be of a sort which Emma particularly admired. She was short, plump, and fair, with a fine bloom, blue eyes, light hair, regular features, and a look of great sweetness, and before the end of the evening Emma was as much pleased with her manners as her person, and quite determined to continue the acquaintance. She was not struck by anything remarkably clever in Miss Smith's conversation, but she found her altogether very engaging, not inconveniently shy, not unwilling to talk, and yet so far from pushing, showing, so proper and becoming a deference, seeming so pleasantly grateful for being admitted to Hartfield, and so artlessly impressed by the appearance of everything in so superior a style to what she had been used to, and that she must have good sense and deserve encouragement. Encouragement should be given. Those soft blue eyes and all those natural graces should not be wasted on the inferior society of Highbury and its connections. The acquaintance she had already formed were unworthy of her. The friends from whom she had just parted, though very good sort of people, must be doing her harm. Emma is something else, man. Dang. The friends from whom she had just parted, though very good sort of people, must be doing her harm. They were a family of the name of Martin, whom Emma well knew by character, as renting a large farm of Mr. Knightley, and residing in the parish of Donwell, very creditably, she believed. She knew Mr. Knightley thought highly of them, but they must be coarse and unpolished, and very unfit to be the intimates of a girl who wanted only a little more knowledge and elegance to be quite perfect. She would notice her. She would improve her. She would detach her from her bad acquaintance and introduce her to good society. She would form her opinions and her manners. It would be an interesting and certainly a very kind undertaking, highly becoming her own situation in life, her leisure and powers. She was so busy in admiring those soft blue eyes, in talking and listening and forming all these schemes in the in-betweens, that the evening flew away at a very unusual rate, and the supper-table, which always closed such parties, and for which she had been used to sit and watch the due time, was all set out and ready, and moved forwards to the fire before she was aware. With an alacrity beyond the common impulse of a spirit which yet was never indifferent to the credit of doing everything well and attentively, with the real goodwill of a mind delighted with its own ideas, did she then do all the honours of the meal. and help and recommend the minced chicken and scalloped oysters with an urgency which she knew would be acceptable to the early hours and civil scruples of their guests. Upon such occasions, poor Mr. Woodhouse's feelings were in sad warfare. He loved to have the cloth laid because it had been the fashion of his youth, but his conviction of suppers being very unwholesome made him rather sorry to see anything put on it. And while his hospitality would have welcomed his visitors to everything, his care for their health made him grieve that they would eat. Sure, another small basin of thin gruel as his own was all that he could, but with thorough self-approbation recommend, though he might constrain himself while the ladies were comfortably clearing the nicer things to say. Mrs. Bates, let me propose your venturing on one of these eggs, an egg boiled very soft and not unwholesome. Searle understands boiling an egg better than anybody. I could not recommend an egg boiled by anybody else, but you need not be afraid. They are very small, you see. One of our small eggs will not hurt you. Miss Bates, let Emma help you to a little bit of tart, a very little bit. Ours are all apple tarts. You need not be afraid of unwholesome preserves here. I do not advise the custard. Mrs. Goddard, what say you to half a glass of wine? A small half glass. Put it in a tumbler of water? I do not think it would disagree with you. Emma allowed her father to talk, but supplied her visitors in a much more satisfactory style, and on the present evening had particular pleasure in sending them away happy. The happiness of Miss Smith was quite equal to her intentions. Miss Woodhouse was so great a personage in Highbury that the prospect of the introduction had given as much panic as pleasure, but the humble, grateful little girl went off with highly gratified feelings, delighted with the affability with which Miss Woodhouse had treated her all evening, and actually shaken hands with her at last. Okay. That was the end of chapter 3. You guys will have to let me know how we're feeling about this, because I realize that this is not everybody's cup of tea. And so it's definitely something that I could read on my own time. If you guys want me to read something else, I just need to figure out what else to read that I won't get copyright stricken for. I'm so far enjoying it, but I don't know if it's something that is hard to understand or is just not as fun for me to read to you guys. But yeah, just let me know. Let me know your thoughts. Chapter 4. Harriet Smith's intimacy at Hartfield was soon a settled thing. Quick and decided in her ways, Emma lost no time in inviting, encouraging, and telling her to come very often, and as their acquaintance increased, so did their satisfaction in each other. As a walking companion, Emma had very early foreseen how useful she might find her. In that respect, Mrs. Weston's loss had been important. Her father never went beyond the shrubbery, where 2 divisions of the ground sufficed him for his long walk, or his short, as the year varied. And since Mrs. Weston's marriage, her exercise had been too much confined. She had ventured once alone to Randall's, but it was not pleasant, and a Harriet Smith, therefore, one whom she could summon at any time to a walk, would be a valuable addition to her privileges. But in every respect, as she saw more of her, she approved her, and was confirmed in all kind designs. Harriet certainly was not clever, but she had a sweet, docile, grateful disposition, was totally free from conceit, and only desiring to be guided by any one she looked up to. Her early attachment to herself was very amiable, and her inclination for good company and power of appreciation and her inclination for good company and power of appreciating what was elegant and clever showed that there was no want of taste, though strength of understanding must not be expected. Altogether, she was quite convinced of Harriet Smith's being exactly the young friend she wanted, exactly the something which her home required. Such a friend as Mrs. Weston was out of the question. 2 such could never be granted. 2 such she did not want. It was quite a different sort of thing, a sentiment distinct and independent. Mrs. Weston was the object of a regard which had its basis in gratitude and esteem. Harriet would be loved as one to whom she could be useful. For Mrs. Weston there was nothing to be done. For Harriet, everything. Interesting. So she sees Mrs. Weston as a once-in-a-lifetime friend that the equal of which can never be found. And Harriet is basically somebody that she can use to... excuse me. Oh, excuse me. And she sees Harriet as someone who is useful for basically filling her time in now losing Mrs. Weston. Her first attempts at usefulness were in an endeavor to find out who were the parents, but Harriet could not tell. She was ready to tell everything in her power, but on this subject questions were vain. Emma was obliged to fancy what she liked, but she could never believe that in the same situation she should not have discovered the truth. Harriet had no penetration. She had been satisfied to hear and believe just what Mrs. Goddard chose to tell her, and looked no farther. Mrs. Goddard and the teachers and the girls and the affairs of the school in general formed naturally a great part of the conversation, and but for her acquaintance with the Martins of Abbey Mill Farm, it must have been the whole. But the Martins occupied her thoughts a good deal. She had spent 2 very happy months with them, and now loved to talk of the pleasures of her visit, and describe the many comforts and wonders of the place. Emma encouraged her talkativeness, amused by such a picture of another set of beings, and enjoying the youthful simplicity which could speak with so much exultation of Mrs. Martin's having 2 parlours, 2 very good parlours indeed, one of them quite as large as Mrs. Goddard's drawing-room, and of her having an upper maid who had lived 25 years with her, and of their having 8 cows, 2 of them Alderneys, and one a little Welch cow, a very pretty little Welch cow indeed, and of Mrs. Martin saying, as she was so fond of it, it should be called her cow, and of their having a very handsome summer house in their garden, where some day next year they were all to drink tea, a very handsome summer house, large enough to hold 12 people. For some time she was amused, without thinking beyond the immediate cause, but as she came to understand the family better, other feelings arose. She had taken up a wrong idea, fancying it was a mother and a daughter, a son and son's wife, who all lived together. But when it appeared that Mr. Martin, who bore a part in the narrative, and was always mentioned with approbation for his great good nature in doing something or other, was a single man, that there was no young Mrs. Martin, no wife in the case, she did suspect danger to her poor little friend from all this hospitality and kindness, and that, if she were not taken care of, she might be required to sink herself forever. She is scheming. I'm putting a sticky note on approbation because I don't know what that word means. And she's basically saying Harriet is telling her about this family that she has been visiting a bunch, and the family has a young man, and so Emma is taking it into her mind that the young man and Harriet are forming a connection, and she thinks that Harriet shouldn't form that connection, basically. With this inspiring notion, her questions increased in number and meaning, and she particularly led Harriet to talk more of Mr. Martin, and there was evidently no dislike to it. Harriet was very ready to speak of the share he had had in their moonlight walks and merry evening games, and dwelt a good deal upon his being so very good-humoured and obliging. He had gone 3 miles round one day in order to bring her some walnuts, because she had said how fond she was of them, and in everything he was so very obliging. He had his shepherd's son into the parlour one night on purpose to sing to her. Oh, I'm guessing that means he had his shepherd's son into the parlour one night on purpose to sing to her. She was very fond of singing. He could sing a little himself. She believed he was very clever and understood everything. He had a very fine flock, and while she was with them, he had been bid more for his wool than anybody in the country. She believed everybody spoke well of him. His mother and sisters were very fond of him. Mrs. Martin had told her one day, and there was a blush as she said it, that it was impossible for anybody to be a better son, and therefore she was sure whenever he married he would make a good husband. Not that she wanted him to marry. She was in no hurry at all. So I'm guessing what's going to happen is Emma is basically going to warn Harriet away from this Mr. Martin and make her very sad, essentially. Hi! Welcome in! Well done, Mrs. Martin, thought Emma. You know what you are about. And when she had come away, Mrs. Martin was very kind as to send Mrs. Goddard a beautiful goose, the finest goose Mrs. Goddard had ever seen. Mrs. Goddard had dressed it on a Sunday and asked all the 3 teachers, Miss Nash and Miss Prince and Miss Richardson, to sup with her. Mr. Martin, I suppose, is not a man of information beyond the line of his own business. He does not read? Oh, yes, no, I don't know, but I believe he has read a good deal, but not what you would think anything of. He reads the agricultural reports and some other books that lay in one of the window seats, but he reads all them to himself. But sometimes of an evening, before we went to cards, he would read something aloud out of the elegant extracts, very entertaining, and I know he has read The Vicar of Wakefield. He never read The Romance of the Forest, nor The Children of the Abbey. He had never heard of such books before I mentioned them, but he is determined to get them now, as soon as ever he can. The next question was, what sort of looking man is Mr. Martin? Oh, not handsome at all. I thought him very plain at first, but I do not think him so plain now. One does not, you know, after a time. But did you ever see him? He is in Highbury even now and then, and he is sure to ride through every week in this way to Kingston. He has passed you very often. That may be, and I may have seen him 50 times, but without having any idea of his name. A young farmer, whether on horseback or on foot, is the very last sort of person to raise my curiosity. The yeomanry are precisely the order of people with whom I feel I can have nothing to do. A degree or two lower and a creditable appearance might interest me. I might hope to be useful to their families in some way or other. But a farmer can need none of my help, and is therefore in no sense as much above my notice as in every other he is below it. To be sure, oh yes, it is not likely you should ever have observed him, but he knows you very well indeed, I mean by sight. I have no doubt of his being a very respectable young man. I know indeed that he is so, and as such wish him well. What do you imagine his age to be? He was 24 the 8th of last June, and my birthday is the 23rd, just a fortnight and a day's difference, which is very odd. Only 24? That is too young to settle. His mother is perfectly right to not be in a hurry. They seem very comfortable as they are, and if she were to take any pains to marry him, she would probably repent it. 6 years hence, if he could meet with a good sort of young woman in the same rank as his own, with a little money, it might be very desirable. 6 years hence? Dear Miss Woodhouse, he would be 30 years old. Well, and that is as early as most men can afford to marry, who are not born to an independence. Mr. Martin, I imagine, has his fortune entirely to make, cannot be at all beforehand with the world. Whatever money he might come into when his father died, whatever his share of the family property, it is, I dare say, all afloat, all employed and in his stock and so forth. And though with diligence and good luck he may be rich in time, it is next to impossible that he should have realized anything yet. To be sure it is so, but they live very comfortably. They have no indoors man, else they do not want for anything, and Mrs. Martin talks of taking a boy another year. I wish you may not get into a scrape, Harriet, whenever he does marry. I mean, as to being acquainted with his wife, for though his sisters from a superior education are not to be altogether objected to, it does not follow that he might marry anybody at all fit for you to notice. The misfortune of your birth ought to make you particularly careful to your associates. There can be no doubt of your being a gentleman's daughter, and you must support your claim to that station by everything within your own power, or there will be plenty of people who would take pleasure in disregarding you. Yes, to be sure, I suppose there are, but while I visit at Hartfield and you are so kind to me, Miss Woodhouse, I am not afraid of what anybody can do. You understand the force of influence pretty well, Harriet, but I would have you so firmly established in good society as to be independent even of Hartfield and Miss Woodhouse. I want to see you permanently well connected, and to that end it will be advisable to have as few odd acquaintances as may be, and therefore I say that if you should still be in this country when Mr. Martin marries, I wish you may not be drawn in by your intimacy with the sisters, to be acquainted with the wife, who will probably be some mere farmer's daughter, without education. To be sure, yes, not that I think Mr. Martin would ever marry anybody, but would have had some education, and been very well brought up. However, I do not mean to set up my opinion against yours, and I am sure I shall not wish for the acquaintance of his wife. I shall always have a great regard for the Miss Martins, especially Elizabeth, and should she be very sorry to give them up, for they are quite as well educated as me. But if he marries a very ignorant, vulgar woman, certainly I had better not visit her if I can help it. Emma watched her through the fluctuations of this speech, and saw no alarming symptoms of love. The young man had been the first admirer, but she trusted there was no other hold, and that there would be no serious difficulty, on Harriet's side, to oppose any friendly arrangement of her own. They met Mr. Martin the very next day, as they were walking on the Donwell road. He was on foot, and after looking very respectfully at her, looked with most unfeigned satisfaction at her companion. Emma was not sorry to have such an opportunity of survey, and walking a few yards forward while they talked together, soon made her quick eye sufficiently acquainted with Mr. Robert Martin. His appearance was very neat, and he looked like a sensible young man, but his person had no other advantage, and when he came to be contrasted with gentlemen, she thought he must lose all the ground he had gained in Harriet's inclination. Harriet was not insensible of manner. She had voluntarily noticed her father's gentleness with admiration as well as wonder. Mr. Martin looked as if he did not know what manner was. They remained but a few minutes together, as Miss Woodhouse was not to be kept waiting, and Harriet then came running to her with a smiling face and in a flutter of spirits, which Miss Woodhouse hoped very soon to compose. Only think of our happening to meet him. How very odd. It was quite a chance, he said, that he had not gone round by Randall's. He did not think we ever walked this road. He thought we walked toward Randall's most days. He has not been able to get the Romance of the Forest yet. He was so busy the last time he was at Kingston that he quite forgot it. But he goes again tomorrow. So very odd we should happen to meet. Well, Miss Woodhouse, is he like what you expected? What do you think of him? Do you think him so very plain? He is very plain, undoubtedly, remarkably plain, but that is nothing compared with his entire want of gentility. I had no right to expect much, and I did not expect much, but I had no idea that he could be so very clownish, so totally without air. I had imagined him, I confess, a degree or two nearer gentility. To be sure, said Harriet in a mortified voice, he is not so genteel as real gentlemen. I think, Harriet, since your acquaintance with us, you have been repeatedly in the company of some of some such very real gentleman, that you must yourself be struck with the difference in Mr. Martin. At Hartfield you have had very good specimens of well-educated, well-bred men. I should be surprised if, after seeing them, you could be in company with Mr. Martin again, without perceiving him to be a very inferior creature, and rather wondering at yourself for having ever thought him at all agreeable before. Do you not begin to feel that now? Were you not struck? I am sure you must have been struck by his awkward look and abrupt manner, and the uncouthness of his voice, which I heard to be wholly unmodulated as I stood here. Certainly he is not like Mr. Knightley. He has not such a fine air and way of walking as Mr. Knightley. I see the difference plain enough, but Mr. Knightley is so very fine a man. Mr. Knightley's air is so remarkably good that it is not fair to compare Mr. Martin with him. You might not see 1 in 100 with gentlemen so plainly written as in Mr. Knightley, but he is not the only gentleman you have been lately used to. What say you to Mr. Weston and Mr. Elton? Compare Mr. Martin with either of them. Compare their manner of carrying themselves, of walking, of speaking, of being silent. You must see the difference. Oh, yes, there is a great difference, but Mr. Weston is almost an old man. Mr. Weston must be between 40 and 50. Which makes his good manners the more valuable. The older a person grows, Harriet, the more important it is that their manners should not be bad. The more glaring and disgusting any loudness or coarseness or awkwardness becomes. What is passable in youth is detestable in later age. Mr. Martin is now awkward and abrupt. What will he be at Mr. Weston's time of life? There is no saying indeed, replied Harriet rather solemnly. But there may be pretty good guessing. He will be completely gross, vulgar farmer, totally inattentive to appearances, and thinking of nothing but profit and loss. Will he indeed? That will be very bad. How much his business engrosses him already is very plain from the circumstances of his forgetting to inquire for the book you recommended. He was a great deal too full of the market to think of anything else, which is just as it should be for a thriving man. What has he to do with books? And I have no doubt that he will thrive, and be a very rich man in time, and his being illiterate and coarse need not disturb us. I wonder he'd not remember the book, was all Harriet's answer, and spoken with a degree of grave displeasure which Emma thought might be safely left to itself. She therefore said no more for some time. Her next beginning was, in one respect, perhaps, Mr. Elton's manners are superior to Mr. Knightley's or Mr. Weston's. They have more gentleness. They might be more safely held up as a pattern. There is an openness, a quickness, almost a bluntness in Mr. Weston, which everybody likes in him, because there is so much good humour with it. But that would not do to be copied. Neither would Mr. Knightley's downright, decided, commanding sort of nature, though it suits him very well. His figure and look and situation in life seem to allow it, but if any young man were to set about copying him, he would not be sufferable. On the contrary, I think a young man might be very safely recommended to think Mr. Elton as a model. Mr. Elton is a good-humoured, cheerful, obliging, and gentle. He seems to me to be grown particularly gentle of late. I do not know whether he has any design of ingratiating himself with either of us, Harriet, by additional softness, but it strikes me that his manners are softer than they used to be. If he means anything, it must be to please you. Did I not tell you that he said of you the other day? She then repeated some warm personal praise which she had drawn from Mr. Elton, and now did full justice to, and Harriet blushed and smiled, and said she had always thought Mr. Elton very agreeable. Mr. Elton was the very person fixed on by Emma for driving the young farmer out of Harriet's head. She thought it would be an excellent match, and only too palpably desirable, natural, and probable for her to have much merit in planning it. She feared it was what everybody else must think of and predict. It was not likely, however, that anybody should have equalled her in the date of the plan, as it had entered her brain during the very first evening of Harriet's coming to Hartfield. The longer she considered it, the greater was her sense of its expediency. Mr. Elton's situation was most suitable, quite the gentleman himself, and without low connections, at the same time not of any family that could fairly object to the doubtful birth of Harriet. He had a comfortable home for her, and Emma imagined a very sufficient income, for though the vicarage of Highbury was not large, he was known to have some independent property, and she thought very highly of him as a good-humoured, well-meaning, respectable young man, without any deficiency of useful understanding or knowledge of the world. She had already satisfied herself that he thought Harriet a beautiful girl, which she trusted, with such frequent meetings at Hartfield, was foundation enough on his side, and on Harriet's there could be little doubt that the idea of being preferred by him would have all the usual weight and efficacy. And he was really a very pleasing young man, a young man whom any woman not fastidious might like. He was reckoned very handsome, his person much admired in general, though not by her, there being a want of elegance of feature which she could not dispense with, but the girl who could be gratified by a Robin Martin's riding about the country to get walnuts for her might very well be conquered by Mr. Elton's admiration. Dang. Oh, man. This is... fastidious. I like that word. This is crazy. So basically she is For anybody that's new, I'm reading Emma by Jane Austen. Emma is basically trying to distract Harriet from a farmer, Robin Martin, who she has grown to like, and Emma has noticed that is probably just on her mind. Basically telling Harriet that he's not a gentleman, and so she shouldn't pay him any mind, and that she, I don't even know necessarily would say deserves, but she requires a finer gentleman to keep her company or to marry one day, because she's trying to be a matchmaker, basically. And so she's now trying to pull the strings to get Harriet to focus on Mr. Elton and have him be the object of her machinations of her mind. Okay, chapter 5. I do not know what your opinion may be, Mrs. Weston, said Mr. Knightley, of this great intimacy between Emma and Harriet Smith, but I think it a bad thing. A bad thing? Do you really think it a bad thing? Why so? I think they will neither of them do the other any good. You surprise me. Emma must do Harriet good, and by supplying her with a new object of interest, Harriet may be said to do Emma good. I have been seeing their intimacy with the greatest pleasure. How very differently we feel. Not think they will do each other any good. This will certainly be the beginning of one of our quarrels about Emma, Mr. Knightley. Perhaps you think Perhaps you think I am come on purpose to quarrel with you, knowing Weston to be out, and that you must still fight your own battle. Mr. Weston would undoubtedly support me if he were here, for he thinks exactly as I do on the subject. We were speaking of it only yesterday, and agreeing how fortunate it was for Emma that there would be such a girl in Highbury for her to associate with. Mr. Knightley, I shall not allow you to be a fair judge in this case. You are so much used to live alone that you do not know the value of a companion, and perhaps no man can be a good judge of the comfort of a woman feels in the society of one of her own sex, after being used to it all her life. I can imagine your objection to Harriet Smith. She is not the superior young woman which Emma's friend ought to be. But on the other hand, as Emma wants to see her better informed, it will be an inducement to her to read more herself. They will read together. She means it, I know. Emma has been meaning to read more ever since she was 12 years old. I have seen a great many lists of her drawing up at various times of books that she meant to read regularly through, and very good lists they were, very well chosen and very neatly arranged, sometimes alphabetically and sometimes by some other rule. The list she drew up when she was only 14, I remember thinking it did her judgment so much credit that I preserved it some time, and I dare say she may have made out a very good list now. But I have done with expecting any course of steady reading from Emma. She will never submit to anything requiring industry and patience, and a subjection of the fancy to the understanding. Where Miss Taylor failed to stimulate, I may safely affirm that Harriet Smith will do nothing. You never could persuade her to read half as much as you wished. You know you could not. I dare say, replied Mrs. Weston, smiling, that I thought so then, but since we have parted, I can never remember Emma's omitting to do anything I wished. There is hardly any desiring to refresh such a memory as that, said Mr. Knightley, feelingly, and for a moment or two he had done. But I, he soon added, who have had no such charm thrown over my senses, must still see, hear, and remember. Emma is spoiled by being the cleverest of her family. At 10 years old, she had the misfortune of being able to answer questions which puzzled her sister at 17. She was always quick and assured, Isabella slow and diffident, and ever since she was 12, Emma has been mistress of the house and of you all. In her mother she lost the only person able to cope with her. She inherits her mother's talents, and must have been under subjection to her. I should have been sorry, Mr. Knightley, to be dependent on your recommendation. Had I quitted Mr. Woodhouse's family and wanted another situation, I do not think you would have spoken a good word for me to anybody. I am sure you always thought me unfit for the office I held. Yes, he said, smiling, you are better placed here, very fit for a wife, but not at all for a governess. But you were preparing yourself to be an excellent wife all the time you were at Hartfield. You might not give Emma such a complete education as your powers would seem to promise, but you were receiving a very good education from her, on the very material matrimonial point of submitting your own will, and doing as you were bid. And if Weston had asked me to recommend him a wife, I would certainly have named Miss Taylor. Thank you. There will be very little merit in making a good wife to such a man as Mr. Weston. Why, to own the truth, I am afraid you are rather thrown away, and that with every disposition to bear, there will be nothing to borne. We will not despair, however. Weston may grow cross from the wantonness of comfort, or his son may plague him. I hope not that. It is not likely. No, Mr. Knightley, do not foretell vexation from that quarter. Not I, indeed. I only name possibilities. I do not pretend to Emma's genius for foretelling and guessing. I hope with all my heart the young Man may be a Weston in merit and a Churchill in fortune, but Harriet Smith, I have not half done with Harriet Smith. I think her the very worst sort of companion that Emma could possibly have. She knows nothing herself and looks upon Emma as knowing everything. She is a flatterer in all her ways, and so much the worse because undesigned. Her ignorance is hourly flattery. How can Emma imagine she has anything to learn herself, while Harriet is presenting such a delightful inferiority? And as for Harriet, I will venture to say that she cannot gain by the acquaintance. Hartfield will only put her out of conceit with all the other places she belongs to. She will grow just refined enough to be uncomfortable with those among whom birth and circumstances have placed her home. I am much mistaken if Emma's doctrines gave any strength of mind, or tend to, at all to make a girl adapt herself rationally to the varieties of her situation in life. They only give a little polish. I either depend more upon Emma's good sense than you do, or am more anxious for her present comfort, for I cannot lament the acquaintance. How well she looked last night! Oh, you would rather talk of her person than her mind, would you? Very well, I shall not attempt to deny Emma's being pretty. Pretty? You say beautiful, rather. Can you imagine anything nearer perfect beauty than Emma altogether, face and figure? I do not know what I could imagine, but I confess that I have seen seldom a face or figure more pleasing to me than hers. But I am a partial old friend. Is he a partial old friend, or is he gonna maybe fall in love with her someday? Such an eye, the true hazel eye, and so brilliant, regular features, open countenance, with a complexion, oh, what a bloom of full health, and such a pretty height and size, such a firm and upright figure. There is health, not merely in her bloom, but in her air, her head, her glance. One hears sometimes of a child being the picture of health. Now, Emma always giving me the idea of being the complete picture of grown-up health. She is loveliness itself. Mr. Knightley, is she not? I have not a fault to find with her person, he replied. I think her all you describe. I love to look at her, and I will add this praise, that I do not think her personally vain. Considering how very handsome she is, she appears to be a little occupied with it. Her vanity lies another way. Mrs. Weston, I am not to be talked out of my dislike of Harriet Smith, or my dread of its doing them both harm. So basically, she finds her very pretty. He doesn't think she's vain by her appearance, but he thinks her vain in mind and spirit, basically. And that's her fault. And I, Mr. Knightley, am equally stout in my confidence of its not doing them any harm. With all dear Emma's little faults, she is an excellent creature. Where shall we see a better daughter, or a kinder sister, or a truer friend? No, no, she has qualities which may be trusted. She will never lead anyone really wrong. She will make no lasting blunder. Where Emma errs once, she is in the right 100 times. Very well, I will not plague you any more. Emma shall be an angel, and I will keep my spleen to myself till Christmas brings John and Isabella. John loves Emma with a reasonable and therefore not a blind affection, and Isabella always thinks as he does, except when he is not quite frightened enough about the children. I am sure of having their opinions with me. I know that you all love her really too well to be unjust or unkind, but excuse me, Mr. Knightley, if I take the liberty, I consider myself, you know, as having somewhat of the privilege of speech that Emma's mother might have had, the liberty of hinting that I do not think any possible good can arise from Harriet Smith's intimacy being made a matter of much discussion among you. Pray excuse me, but supposing any little inconvenience may be apprehended from the intimacy, it cannot be expected that Emma, accountable to nobody but her father, who perfectly approves the acquaintance, should put an end to it, so long as it is a source of pleasure to herself. It has been so many years my province to give advice that you cannot be surprised, Mr. Knightley, at this little remains of office. Not at all, cried he. I am much obliged to you for it. It is very good advice, and it shall have a better fate than your advice has often found, for it shall be attended to. Mrs. John Knightley is easily alarmed, and might be made unhappy about her sister. Be satisfied, said he. I will not raise any outcry. I will keep my ill humour to myself. I have a very sincere interest in Emma. Isabella does not seem more my sister, has never excited a greater interest, perhaps hardly so great. There is an anxiety, a curiosity, in what one feels for Emma. I wonder what will become of her. So do I, said Mrs. Weston gently, very much. She will always declare she will never marry, which, of course, means just nothing at all. But I have no idea that she has yet ever seen a man she cared for. It would not be a bad thing for her to be very much in love with a proper object. I should like to see Emma in love, and in some doubt of return. It would do her good. But there is nobody hereabouts to attach her, and she goes so seldom from home. There does, indeed, seem as little to tempt her to break her resolution at present, said Mrs. Weston, as can well be, and while she is so happy at Hartfield, I cannot wish her to be forming any attachment which would be creating such difficulties on poor Mr. Woodhouse's account. I do not recommend matrimony at present to Emma, though I mean no slight to the state, I assure you. Part of her meaning was to conceal some favorite thoughts of her own, and Mr. Weston's on the subject as much as possible. There were wishes at Randall's respecting Emma's destiny, but it was not desirable to have them suspected, and the quiet transition, which Mr. Knightley soon afterwards made to, "What does Weston think of the weather? Shall we have rain?" convinced her that he had nothing more to say or surmise about Hartfield. Interesting. Okay, so that conversation basically was Mr. Knightley was bringing up that he does not like the acquaintance of Emma with Harriet because he doesn't think that anything good is going to come of it. And Mrs. Weston doesn't see anything wrong with it and disagrees with Mr. Knightley. Obviously for many reasons, but Mr. Knightley then says maybe I'll bring it up to Emma's brother-in-law and sister because he knows that the brother-in-law will probably agree with him and Emma's sister will agree with her husband. But then Mrs. Weston basically warns him against it and says, "Don't do that." He says, "Okay, I will respect your wishes. I won't do that." And then they talk about who Emma is going to end up with one day. Mr. Knightley is unsure. She doesn't leave the house enough, all those kinds of things. But Mrs. Weston, I believe, thinks that Mr. Knightley may be a good match for her. So that's where we're at right now. That was the end of chapter 5. So far, I'm very much liking it. It's obviously a little bit more of a difficult reading or a writing style to comprehend easily, but it's really honestly funny so far. Okay. I'll probably do maybe one or two more chapters today. Chapter 6. Emma could not feel a doubt of having given Harriet's fancy a proper direction, and raised the gratitude of her young vanity to a very good purpose, for she found her decidedly more sensible than before of Mr. Elton's being a remarkably handsome man, with most agreeable manners. And, as she had no hesitation in following up the assurance of his admiration by agreeable hints, she was soon pretty confident of creating as much liking on Harriet's side as there could be any occasion for. She was quite convinced of Mr. Elton's being in the fairest way of falling in love, if not in love already. She had no scruple with regard to him. He talked of Harriet, and praised her so warmly that she could not suppose anything wanting which a little time would not add. His perception of the striking improvement of Harriet's manner since her introduction at Hartfield was not one of the least agreeable proofs of his growing attachment. "You have given Miss Smith all that she required," said he. "You have made her graceful and easy. She was a beautiful creature when she came to you, but, in my opinion, the attractions you have added are infinitely superior to what she received from nature. I am so glad you think I have been useful to her, but Harriet only wanted drawing out, and receiving a few, very few hints. She had all she had all the natural grace of sweetness of temper and artlessness in herself. I have done very little." "If it were admissible to contradict a lady," said the gallant Mr. Elton, "I have perhaps given her a little more decision of character, having taught her to think on points which had not fallen her way before." "Exactly so. That is what principally strikes me. So much superadded decision of character. Skilful has been the hand." "Great has been the pleasure, I am sure. I never met with a disposition more truly amiable." "I have no doubt of it." And it was spoken with a sort of sighing animation, which had a vast deal of the lover. She was not less pleased another day with the manner in which he seconded a sudden wish of hers to have Harriet's picture. Did you ever have your likeness taken, Harriet?" said she. "Did you ever sit for your picture?" Harriet was on the point of leaving the room, and only stopped to say, with a very interesting naivety, "Oh dear, no, never." No sooner was she out of sight than Emma exclaimed, "What an exquisite possession a good picture of her would be! I would give any money for it. I almost long to attempt her likeness myself. You do not know it, I dare say, but 2 or 3 years ago I had a great passion for taking likenesses, and attempted several of my friends, and was thought to have a tolerable eye in general, but from one cause or another I gave it up in disgust. But really, I could almost venture, if Harriet would sit to me, I would be such a delight to have her picture." "Let me entreat you," cried Mr. Elton. "It would indeed be a delight. Let me entreat you, Miss Woodhouse, to exercise so charming a talent in favour of your friend. I know what your drawings are. How could you suppose me ignorant? Is not this room rich in specimens of your landscapes and flowers, and has not Mrs. Weston come in inimitable figure pieces in her drawing-room at Randall's?" "Yes, good man," thought Emma. "But what has all that to do with taking likenesses? You know nothing of drawing. Don't pretend to be in raptures about mine. Keep your raptures for Harriet's face." I have a feeling that Mr. Elton actually likes Emma, and that's going to be Interesting. Hi, Spooky Tech! Let's see. Yes, let's see. Keep your raptures for Harriet's face, was Emma's last thought. Well, if you give me such kind encouragement, Mr. Elton, I believe I shall try what I can do. Harriet's features are very delicate, which makes a likeness difficult, and yet there is a peculiarity in the shape of the eye and the lines about the mouth which one ought to catch. Exactly so. The shape of the eye and the lines about the mouth. I have not a doubt of your success. Pray attempt it. As you will do it, it will indeed, to use your own words, be an exquisite possession. But I am afraid, Mr. Elton, Harriet will not like to sit. She thinks so little of her own beauty. Did not you observe her manner of answering me? How completely it meant, why should my picture be drawn? Oh, yes, I observed it, I assure you. It was not lost on me, but still I cannot imagine she would not be persuaded. Harriet was soon back again, and the proposal almost immediately made, and she had no scruples which could stand many minutes against the earnest pressing of both the others. Emma wished to go to work directly, and therefore produced the portfolio containing her various attempts at portraits, for not one of them had ever been finished, that they might decide together on the best size for Harriet. Her many beginnings were displayed. Miniatures, half-lengths, whole-lengths, pencil, crayon, and watercolors had all been tried in turn. She had always wanted to do everything, and had made more progress both in drawing and music than many might have done with so little labor as she would ever submit to. She played and sang and drew in almost every style, but steadiness had always been wanting, and in nothing had she approached the degree of excellence which she would have been glad to command, and ought not to have failed of. She was not much deceived as to her own skill, either as an artist or a musician, but she was not unwilling to have others deceived, or sorry to know her reputation for accomplishment often higher than it deserved. Interesting. Okay, so she at least can admit that she is not excellent at anything. She is a jack of all trades, master of none, is what I'm gathering from this. There was merit in every drawing, in the least finish, perhaps the most. Her style was spirited, but there had been much less, or had there been 10 times more, the delight and admiration of her two companions would have been the same. They were both in ecstasies. A likeness pleases everybody, and Miss Woodhouse's performance must be capital. No great variety of faces for you, said Emma. I had only my own family to study from. There is my father, another of my father, but the idea of sitting for his picture made him so nervous that I could only take him by stealth. Neither of them very like therefore. Mrs. Weston, again and again and again, you see. Dear Mrs. Weston, always my kindest friend on every occasion. She would sit whenever I asked her. There is my sister, and really quite her own little elegant figure, and the face not unlike. I should have made a good likeness of her if she would have sat longer, but she was in such a hurry to have me draw her 4 children that she would not be quiet. Then here come all my attempts at 3 of those 4 children. There they are, Henry and John and Bella, from one end of the sheet to the other, and any one of them might do for any of the rest. She was so eager to have them drawn that I could not refuse, but there is no making children of 3 or 4 years old stand still, you know. Nor can it be very easy to take any likeness of them, beyond the air and complexion, unless they are coarser featured than any of Mamma's children ever were. Here is my sketch of the 4th, who was a baby. I took him as he was sleeping on the sofa, and it is as strong a likeness of his cockade as you would wish to see. He had nestled down his head most conveniently. That's very like. I am rather proud of little George. The corner of the sofa is very good. Then here is my last, enclosing a pretty sketch of the gentleman in small size, whole length. My last and my best, my brother, Mr. John Knightley. This did not want much of being finished, but when I put it away in a pet, and vowed I would never take another likeness, I could not help being provoked, for after all my pains, and when I had really made a very good likeness of it, Mrs. Weston and I were quite agreed in thinking it very like. Only too handsome, too flattering. But that was a fault on the right side. After all this came poor dear Isabella's cold approbation of, yes, it was a little like, but to be sure it did not do him justice. We had had a great deal of trouble in persuading him at all. We had had a great deal of trouble in persuading him to sit at all. It was made a great favour of, and altogether it was more than I could bear, and so I never would finish it, to have it apologized over as an unfavourable likeness to every morning visitor in Brunswick Square. And as I said, I did then forswear ever drawing anybody again. But for Harriet's sake, or rather for my own, and as there are no husbands or wives in the case at present, I will break my resolution now. Mr. Elton seemed very properly struck and delighted by the idea, and was repeating, no husbands and wives in the case at present, indeed, as you observe. Exactly so. No husbands and wives, with so interesting a consciousness that Emma began to consider whether she had not better leave them together at once, but as she wanted to be drawing, the declaration must wait a little longer. She had soon fixed on the size and and sort of portrait. It was to be a whole length in watercolors, like Mr. John Knightley's, and was destined, if she could please herself, to hold a very honourable station over the mantelpiece. The sitting began, and Harriet, smiling and blushing and afraid of not keeping her attitude and countenance, presented a very sweet mixture of youthful expression on the steady eyes of the artist. But there was no doing anything, with Mr. Elton fidgeting behind her and watching every touch. She gave him credit for stationing himself where he might gaze and gaze again without offence, but was really obliged to put an end to it, and request him to place himself elsewhere. It then occurred to her to employ him in reading. If he would be so good as to read to them, it would be a kindness indeed. It would amuse away the difficulties of her part, and lessen the irksomeness of Miss Smith's. Mr. Elton was only too happy. Harriet listened, and Emma drew in peace. She must allow him to be still frequently coming to look. Anything less would certainly have been too little in a lover, and he was ready at the smallest intermission of the pencil to jump up and see the progress, and be charmed. There was no being displeased with such an encourager, for his admiration made him discern a likeness almost before it was possible. She could not respect his eye, but his love, and his complaisance was unexceptionable. The sitting was altogether very satisfactory. She was quite enough pleased with the first day's sketch to wish to go on. There was no want of likeness. She had been fortunate in the attitude, and as she meant to throw in a little improvement to the figure, to give a little more height and considerably more elegance, she had great confidence of its being in every way a pretty drawing at last, and of its filling its destined place with credit to them both. A standing memorial of the beauty of the one, the skill of the other, and the friendship of both, with as many other agreeable associations as Mr. Elton's very promising attachment was likely to add. Harriet was to sit again the next day, and Mr. Elton, just as he ought, entreated for the permission of attending and reading to them again. "By all means. We shall be most happy to consider you as one of the party." The same civilities and courtesies, the same success and satisfactions took place on the morrow, and accompanied the whole progress of the picture, which was rapid and happy. Everybody who saw it was pleased, but Mr. Elton was in continual raptures, and defended it through every criticism. Miss Woodhouse has given her friend the only beauty she wanted," observed Mrs. Weston to him, not in the least expecting that she was addressing a lover. "The expression of the eye is most correct, but Miss Smith has not those eyebrows and eyelashes. It is the fault of her face that she has them not." "Do you think so?" replied he. "I cannot agree with you. It appears to me a most perfect resemblance in every feature. I never saw such a likeness in my life. We must allow for the effect of shade, you know." "You have made her too tall, Emma," said Mr. Knightley. Emma knew that she had, but would not own it, and Mr. Elton warmly added, "Oh, no, certainly not too tall, not in the least too tall. Consider she is sitting down, which naturally presents a different, which, in short, gives exactly the idea, and the proportions must be preserved, you know. Proportions, foreshortening, oh, no, it gives one exactly the idea of such a height as Miss Smith's, exactly so, indeed." "It is very pretty," said Mr. Woodhouse, "so prettily done, just as your drawings always are, my dear. I do not know anybody who draws so well as you do. The only thing I do not thoroughly like is that she seems to be sitting out of doors, with only a little shawl over her shoulders, and it makes one think she must catch cold. But, my dear papa, it is supposed to be summer, a warm day in summer. Look at the tree." "But it is never safe to sit out of doors, my dear." "You, sir, may say anything," cried Mr. Elton, "but I must confess that I regard it as a most happy thought, the placing of Miss Smith out of doors, and the tree is touched with such inimitable spirit. Any other situation would have been much less in character. The naivety of Miss Smith's manners, and altogether, oh, it is most admirable. I cannot keep my eyes from it. I never saw such a likeness." The next thing wanted was to get the picture framed, and here was a few difficulties. It must be done directly. It must be done in London. The order must go through the hands of some intelligent person whose taste could be depended on, and Isabella, the usual doer of all commissions, must not be applied to, because it was December, and Mr. Woodhouse could not bear the idea of her stirring out of her house in the fogs of December. But no sooner was the distress known to Mr. Elton than it was removed. His gallantry was always on the alert. Might he be trusted with the commission? What infinite pleasure should he have in executing it? He could ride to London at any time. It was impossible to say how much he should be gratified by being employed on such an errand. He was too good. She could not endure the thought. She would not give him such a troublesome office for the world, brought on the desired reputation of entreaties and assurances, and a very few minutes settled the business. Mr. Elton was to take the drawing to London, choose the frame, and give the directions, and Emma thought she could so pack it as to ensure its safety without much incommoding him, while he seemed most fearful of not being incommoded enough. "What a precious deposit," said he with a tender sigh as he received it. "This man is almost too gallant to be in love," thought Emma. I should say so, but that I suppose there may be 100 different ways of being in love. He is an excellent young man, and will suit Harriet exactly. It will be an exactly so, as he says himself. But he does sigh and languish and study for compliments rather more than I can endure as a principal. I come in for a pretty good share as a second, but it is his gratitude on Harriet's account. Interesting. Okay, let me see how long. That was the end of chapter 6. Okay, chapter 7's short, so I'll read this one and then probably be done. Also, Dr. Mr. Elton is definitely in love with Emma and not Harriet. And he, as everybody else can, except for Mr. Knightley, has found no fault in Emma at this point. Chapter 7. The very day of Mr. Elton's going to London produced a fresh occasion for Emma's services towards her friend. Harriet had been at Hartfield as usual, soon after breakfast, and after a time had gone home to return again to dinner. She returned, and sooner than had been talked of, and with an agitated, hurried look, announcing something extraordinary to have happened, which she was longing to tell. Half a minute brought it all out. She had heard, as soon as she got back to Mrs. Goddard's, that Mr. Martin had been there an hour before, and finding she was not at home, nor particularly expected, had left a little parcel for her from one of his sisters, and gone away. And on opening this parcel, she had actually found, besides the 2 songs which she had lent Elizabeth to copy, a letter to herself. And this letter was from him, from Mr. Martin, and contained a direct proposal of marriage. Who could have thought it? She was so surprised she did not know what to do. Yes, quite a proposal of marriage, and a very good letter, at least she thought so. And he wrote it as if he really loved her very much. But she did not know, and so she was come as fast as she could to ask Miss Woodhouse what she should do. Emma was half ashamed of her friend for seeming so pleased and so doubtful. "Upon my word," she cried, "the young man is determined not to lose anything for want of asking. He will connect himself well if he can." "Will you read the letter?" cried Harriet. "Pray do. I'd rather you would." Emma was not sorry to be pressed. She read, and was surprised. The style of the letter was much above her expectation. There were not merely no grammatical errors, but as a composition it would not have disgraced a gentleman. The language, though plain, was strong and unaffected, and the sentiments it conveyed very much to the credit of the writer. It was short, but expressed a good sense, warm attachment, liberality, propriety, even delicacy of feelings. She paused over it, while Harriet stood anxiously watching for her opinion, and a "well, well," was at last forced to add, "Is it a good letter, or is it too short?" "Yes, indeed, a very good letter," replied Emma rather slowly. "So good a letter, Harriet, that everything considered, I think one of his sisters must have helped him. I can hardly imagine the young man whom I saw talking with you the other day could express himself so well, if left quite to his own powers. And yet it is not the style of a woman. No, certainly, it is too strong and concise, not diffuse enough for a woman. No doubt he is a sensible man, and I suppose may have a natural talent for, thinks strongly and clearly, and when he takes a pen in hand, his thoughts naturally find proper words. It is so with some men. Yes, I understand the sort of mind. Vigorous, decided, with sentiments to a certain point, not coarse. A better written letter, Harriet," returning it, "than I had expected." "Well," said the still waiting Harriet. "Well, and what shall I do?" Also, I'm finding it interesting because some of the, technically dialogue, because it's in quotations, is written as still kind of like third person almost. So it's like the narrator style, but it's in quotations. So it's like both kind of like they're talking, but speaking as a narrator kind of. And then it feels very like you're watching it and you're hearing Emma's like narration at the same time, almost. In a different way than if you were just reading about it in third person, if that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense, but. Okay. "Well, and what shall I do?" "What shall you do? In what respect? Do you mean with regard to this letter?" "Yes. But what are you in doubt of? You must answer it, of course, and speedily." "Yes, but what shall I say? Dear Miss Woodhouse, do advise me." "Oh, no, no, the letter had much better be all your own. You will express yourself very properly, I'm sure. There is no danger of your not being intelligible, which is the first thing. Your meaning must be unequivocal, no doubts or demurs, and such expressions of gratitude and concern for the pain you are inflicting as propriety requires will present themselves unbidden to your mind, I am persuaded. You need not be promoted to write with the appearance of sorrow for his disappointment." "You think I ought to refuse him, then?" said Harriet, looking down. "Ought to refuse him? My dear Harriet, what do you mean? Are you in any doubt as to that?" I thought, but I beg your pardon, perhaps I have been under a mistake. I certainly have been misunderstanding you if you feel in doubt as to the purport of your answer. I had imagined you were consulting me only as to the wording of it. Harriet was silent. With a little reserve of manner, Emma continued, You mean to return a favourable answer, I collect? No, I do not. That is, I do not mean. What shall I do? What you advise me to do? Pray, dear Miss Woodhouse, tell me what I ought to do. I shall not give you any advice, Harriet. I will have nothing to do with it. This is a point with which you must settle with your own feelings. I had no notion that he liked me so very much, said Harriet, contemplating the letter. For a little while Emma persevered in her silence, but beginning to apprehend the bewitching flattery of that letter might be too powerful, she thought it best to say, I lay it down as a general rule, Harriet, that if a woman doubts as to whether she should accept a man or not, she certainly ought to refuse him. If she can hesitate as to yes, she ought to say no directly. It is not a state to be safely entered into with doubtful feelings, with half a heart. I thought it my duty as a friend and older than yourself to say thus much to you. But do not imagine that I want to influence you. Oh, no, I am sure you are a great deal too kind to... But if you would just advise me as what I had best to do... No, I do not mean in that. As you say, one's mind ought to be quite made up. One should not be hesitating. It is a very serious thing. It will be safer to say no, perhaps. Do I think I had better say no? Not for the world, said Emma, smiling graciously. Would I advise you either way? You must be the best judge of your own happiness. If you prefer Mr. Martin to every other person, if you think him the most agreeable man you have ever been in company with, why should you hesitate? You blush, Harriet. Does anybody else occur to you at this moment under such a definition? Harriet, do not deceive yourself. Do not be run away with by gratitude and compassion. At this moment, who are you thinking of? The symptoms were favourable. Instead of answering, Harriet turned away confused, and stood thoughtfully by the fire, and though the letter was still in her hand, it was now mechanically twisted about without regard. Emma waited the result with impatience, but not without strong hopes. At last, with some hesitation, Harriet said, Miss Woodhouse, as you will not give me your opinion, I must do as well as I can by myself, and I have now quite determined, and really almost made up my mind, to refuse Mr. Martin. Do you think I am right? Perfectly right, my dearest Harriet. You are doing just what you ought. While you were at all in suspense, I kept my feelings to myself, but now that you are so completely decided, I have no hesitation in approving. Dear Harriet, I give myself joy of this. It would have grieved me to lose your acquaintance, which must have been the consequence of your marrying Mr. Martin. While you were in the smallest degree wavering, I said nothing about it, because I would not influence, but it would have been the loss of a friend to me. I could not have visited Mrs. Robert Martin of Abbey Mill Farm. Now I am secure of you forever. Harriet had not surmised her own danger, but the idea of it struck her forcibly. You could not have visited me, she cried, looking aghast. No, to be sure you could not, but I never thought of that before. That would have been too dreadful. What an escape! Dear Miss Woodhouse, I would not give up the pleasure and honour of being intimate with you for anything in the world. Indeed, Harriet, it would have been a severe pang to lose you, but it must have been. You would have thrown yourself out of all good society. I must have given you up. Dear me, how should I ever have borne it? It would have killed me never to come to Hartfield any more. Dear affectionate creature, you, banished to Abbey Mill Farm, you, confined to the society of the illiterate and vulgar all your life. I wonder how the young man could have the assurance to ask it. He must have a pretty good opinion of himself. I do not think he is conceited either, in general, said Harriet, her conscience opposing such censure. At least he is very good-natured, and I shall always feel much obliged to him, and have a great regard for. But that is quite a different thing from, and you know, though he may like me, it does not follow that I should. And certainly I must confess that since my visiting here I have seen people, and if one comes to compare them, person and manners, there is no comparison at all. One is so very handsome and agreeable. However, I do really think Mr. Martin is a very amiable young man, and have a great opinion of him. And his being so much attended to me, and his writing such a letter, but as to leaving you, it is what I would not do upon any consideration. Thank you, my own little sweet friend. We will not be parted. A woman is not to marry a man merely because she is asked, or because he is attached to her, and can write a tolerable letter. Oh, no, and it is but a short letter, too. Emma felt the bad taste of her friend, but let it pass with a very true, and it would be a small consolation to her, for the clownish manner with which might be offended for every hour of the day, to know that her husband could write a good letter. Oh, yes, very. Nobody cares for a letter. The thing is, to be always happy with pleasant companions. I am quite determined to refuse him. But how shall I do? What shall I say? Emma assured her there would be no difficulty in the answer, and advised its being written directly, which was agreed to, in the hope of her assistance. And though Emma continued to protest against any assistance being wanted, it was in fact given in the formation of every sentence. Oh, that is so funny. The looking over his letter again and replying to it had such a softening tendency that it was particularly necessary to brace her up with a few decisive expressions, and she was so very much concerned at the idea of making him unhappy, and thought so much of what his mother and sisters would think and say, and was so anxious that they should not fancy her ungrateful, that Emma believed if the young man had come in her way at that moment, he would have been accepted after all. This letter, however, was written, and sealed, and sent. The business was finished, and Harriet safe. She was rather low all the evening, but Emma could allow for her amiable regrets, and sometimes relieved them by speaking of her own affection, sometimes by bringing forward the idea of Mr. Elton. "I shall never be invited to Abbey Mill again," was said in rather a sorrowful tone. "Nor, if you were, could I ever bear to part with you, my Harriet. You are a great deal too necessary at Hartfield to be spared to Abbey Mill. And I am sure I should never want to go there, for I am never happy but at Hartfield." Some time afterwards it was, "I think Mrs. Goddard would be very much surprised if she knew what had happened. I am sure Miss Nash would, for Miss Nash thinks her own sister very well unmarried, and it is only a linen draper." One should be sorry to see greater pride or refinement in the teacher of a school, Harriet. I dare say Miss Nash would envy you such an opportunity as this of being married. Even this conquest would appear valuable in her eyes. As to anything superior for you, I suppose she is quite in the dark. The attentions of a certain person can hardly be among the tittle-tattle of Highbury yet. Hitherto, I fancy you and I are the only people to whom his looks and manners have explained themselves. Harriet blushed and smiled, and said something about wondering that people should like her so much. The idea of Mr. Elton was certainly cheering, but still, after a time, she was tender-hearted again towards the rejected Mr. Martin. "Now he has got my letter," she said softly. "I wonder what they are all doing, whether his sisters know. If he is unhappy, they will be unhappy too. I hope he will not mind it so very much." "Let us think of those among our absent friends who are more cheerfully employed," cried Emma. "At this moment, perhaps, Mr. Elton is showing your picture to his mother and sisters, telling how much more beautiful is the original, and after being asked for it 5 or 6 times, allowing them to hear your name, your own dear name." "My picture! But he has left my picture in Bond Street." "Has he so? Then I know nothing of Mr. Elton. No, my dear little modest Harriet, depend upon it, the picture will not be in Bond Street till just before he mounts his horse tomorrow. It is his companion all this evening, his solace, his delight. It opens his designs to his family. It introduces you among them. It diffuses through the party those pleasantness feelings of our nature, eager curiosity and warm prepossession. Sorry. How cheerful, how animated, how suspicious, how busy their imaginations all are." Harriet smiled again, and her smiles grew stronger. Dang. Oof, this is going to be rough. Okay, that was the end of chapter 7. I think I'm going to stop there. So far, really enjoying it. This is actually kind of hilarious, and I am very intrigued to see what happens specifically with all the things that she's trying to orchestrate. I'm interested to see how those pan out. I have a feeling her and Mr. Knightley are going to end up together because he's the only one that sees any fault in her and actually sees the real her and loves her for it, but also will call her out on it. And she herself said that she finds him handsome. But I think they just have a familiarity about them that she hasn't seen him in that light before. And she also is just convinced that she's not going to get married. So, excuse me. I definitely think that's going to shift. But it might take a little bit. So this book is 387 pages. So it's not super long, but it is obviously, the classic writing style. So it might take me a little bit longer, but so far I'm really liking it. Let me know what you guys think, because again, I was saying this earlier, I know it's a little bit of a different style than I have read the last couple times and also just read in general. So if you guys are enjoying it and it's helping you kind of appreciate this era more, then I will absolutely continue to read it. If you guys are not really loving it and want to give me recommendations for something else to read and I can just read this on my own time, let me know. But I don't know. I'm sure there's a way to message directly on Twitch, but if you can do that if you want, or if you want to, you can always message me on Instagram, time2laugh.34. You can follow me there. Feel free to give me recommendations, give me thoughts on this. I'll try to make some clips and maybe do some like polls on my Instagram to see if people want me to keep reading this. But for those that stopped in, thank you so much. Thank you for dropping into the chat. Thank you for coming in to watch. I hope you guys had a great time, and I will see you guys next Monday at 10 a.m. I have a pretty busy week this week, so definitely don't think I'm going to have time to stream again, but I will see you guys next Monday at 10 a.m. and I hope you all have an incredible week. Bye.